In this video, I'm going to go over how to build a sequence using this three-step strategy that I laid out in another video. If you're not familiar with the video, I'm going to try to put a link in this video that'll get you there. But if not, just go over to my video page and you'll see it there. Okay, so just a little recap of this strategy, the three-step strategy that I will typically use, or that you can use, is strategy number one is pick a destination. Strategy number two, find out challenges and difficulties your students are going to experience in pursuit of the destination. And then the next step after that, build your sequence, but build it backwards from your destination. So, pick your destination. What are some of the what are the challenges and difficulties? Most common challenges and difficulties, and then build your sequence backwards from your destination back to the beginning of your class. Okay. So let's make a sequence. Let's make a real short sequence here. So this is just an example. It's not going to be this long, robust sequence like you're doing a vinyasa class or a longer form class. This is just going to be a short, quick example of how you do this. So I'm going to use, as the destination, I'm going to use Urdhva Dhanurasana, or wheel pose. So Urdhva D, also known, aka also known as wheel. So Urdhva Dhanurasana, or wheel pose, it's that back bend, supine back bend where just your feet and your hands are on the floor, and then everything else has been lifted off the floor and you arch your back. So for a lot of people, that's challenging. That's a fairly challenging or a fairly big ask for a lot of people that come into the room. Whenever you go to brainstorm for the challenges and difficulties section of building your sequence, what I would suggest here is go with the most common challenges and difficulties, as that will address, let's say, like the most common things that you're going to see in the room. So it's pretty wide and it's pretty broad to start, but over time, like if you work with the same students again and again, these challenges and difficulties can start to be more tailored to who's in your room. But if you're just teaching drop-in classes like most of us are, then I would suggest start off with a very wide scope until you actually get a consistent student base, and then you can start to draw this section in a little bit narrower and start to address each individual that's actually in your classroom. Okay, so that's just a suggestion. Start with a really wide scope, and then over time, if you do start to develop a very consistent student base, then start to narrow it down and address what's in the room in front of you. But at first, you might not know who that is. Okay, Urdhva Dhanurasana. I'm going to start from essentially, we're going to go from low to high. So from lower in the body to higher up in the body. That's how I'm going to address it today. You can do it any way you want, but for today, I'm just going to go from the bottom up. So I'm going to start with the hips, go up to the spine, and then go up to the shoulders after that. So at the hips, most people in Urdhva Dhanurasana, at the front of their hips, or as well as / quads, front of thighs, there's going to be a little bit of shortening and a little bit of tightness there in those areas for a variety of different reasons. So one of the difficulties that students are going to experience when trying to do wheel pose is that the front of their thighs, the front of their hips are a little bit tight. So to address that, create more mobility at front of hips and thighs. So create a little bit more mobility, freedom of movement at the front of the hips and the front of their thighs. So pretty straightforward. We can accomplish that. We can address that. Going up the chain a little bit, I'm gonna say that most commonly for Urdhva Dhanurasana, a lot of students are going to experience that their back body, their back muscles and so on are actually kind of tight. They don't move that freely. Most students that come into your room, their back muscles and so on are going to be a little bit tight. They're not going to move that freely or fluidly. So I would personally want to create a little bit of opening and mobility or freedom of movement on the back side of their body. So a little bit of the back of hip, all the way up into the back body, even all the way up into the upper back. So create mobility, or I'm going to put freedom of movement, more freedom of movement through their back. Just go simple here, through back. How do you like my handwriting? I think that looks pretty good. That's pretty good. All right, create freedom of movement through their back. Okay, a lot of different ways you can do it. Not just one way. There's so many different ways you could do it. Now, what else are some of the most common challenges and difficulties that they're going to experience? I would say that a lot of people have trouble taking their arms overhead. I see that again and again, just arms overhead. That's pretty challenging for a lot of people. So I would focus there. So how would I word this? Make it easier for people to take their arms overhead. You know, help them out there. Help people take arms overhead. Okay, so that's 3 different things. And you can keep going. So I'll give 1 or 2 more that I see for Urdhva Dhanurasana. And, but this right here, those 3 things, if you're only teaching a 60-minute class, that's probably plenty. This is probably all you're going to be able to actually touch upon in your 60-minute class. But help people take arms overhead. So then if you had a longer class, if you have more time, you might want to put more of these difficulties and challenges out there, so you have more to choose from. So you have more to pull from in your back pocket to fill out that class and make a more robust offering. So like you're doing a workshop on Urdhva Dhanurasana. So if you were doing a workshop, go ahead and write out more of these challenges and difficulties, and then therefore you can focus on so many more things. You know, start to get into the nitty-gritty and the like tiny little nuances of your goal, your destination, and then you start to build out your sequence from there. But help people take arms overhead. What else would be helpful here is to actually engage the back of the hip. So engage the back of the hip, engage your hamstrings, or get their hamstrings to engage, as that is going to not only create more freedom in the front of the hips, but that's also what takes them into the back bend, all right? So I would say engage or engage, strengthen, awaken, strengthen. I don't know how to spell. Strengthen, awaken, awaken. Back of hips. So gluteal slash hamstrings. So that'll take the hip into extension. So engage the back of your hips, mainly glute max. Hamstrings take the hip into extension, also known as towards a back bend, depending what position you're in. All right, so you got that. As well, I would probably try to build a little bit of strength in the arms and upper back so they're more capable of actually pushing their body weight up into Urdhva Dhanurasana. So similar thing here. So strengthen, arms, back of shoulders, backs of arms, back of shoulders, slash back shoulders. All right, to push up into Urdhva Dhanurasana. All right, challenges and difficulties. Dude, you got a lot to work with here. This is a ton. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's a ton of information to work with here. So that, to me, that's enough to start building out a really solid sequence, a really thoughtful, impactful sequence. Once you do all of these, you're going to want to maybe jumble them around, like shift them around a little bit. So in order of priorities, meaning like what's most important, what's least important, and that's entirely up to you. That's entirely up to you for you to decide what you want your students to experience, what you want to help your students with. Say if you feel like this is more important than this one, then go ahead and drop that one into the first position. Jumble them around however you feel is most appropriate for your class. But I wrote these down in the order that I would focus on them for today's exercise. You can put them however you want to. You can drop as many as you'd like and just focus on this one thing, or just this one thing, or just focus on two things. So this is all where your creative process comes into play. How do you want to lay out your class? What do you want your students to experience? What do you want them to work on? What do you want them to know? And so all of this whole section here, like this is what informs your sequence. So this work here informs what comes down here. Okay? Hope you got that. Now I'm going to go ahead and erase some of this just so I have the room to actually write the sequence, and you can see it. But I have all that information in my head right now, so no worries. Okay, so we got all those challenges and difficulties written down. It's still wet. Now we'll build the sequence. Build sequence backwards. Backwards. And when I say build sequence backwards, I mean from the destination point. So I'll put that in here. From destination. That's an important piece. So even though I say this, I don't mean build a, like when I say build a sequence backwards, that's not from Shavasana all the way back. This is important. Build it from the destination all the way back. And once you get good at it, once you really start to understand what that means and what that looks like, you can go about it any way that you want. But just kind of like a skills building exercise, I would suggest doing it in this manner. Build backwards from your destination until your mind actually like just naturally starts to build sequences that way. Just do it this way, get the feel of it, and then you can kind of play around with it afterwards. All right, so Urdhva Dhanurasana is our destination for this example of a class. If you're doing a 60-minute class, and you're doing kind of like the peak pose strategy where Urdhva Dhanurasana is like the height or the highest part of your sequence, or like the peak of your sequence, then this is probably gonna end up in your sequence around 2/3 of the way through. So we'll put Urdhva Dhanurasana down here, way down here. I hope you can still see it. I'm not sure. D. So this is your peak of the sequence, and then go ahead and build backwards. So typically, so this is just an example, typically how most people are going to come into Urdhva Dhanurasana is from bridge pose. That's pretty common and one of the easier strategies if you're not using props. So bridge pose, I'm going to put that before Urdhva D, as that's kind of your most common vinyasa based, flow based entry into Urdhva Dhanurasana is bridge pose, and then if you want to push up, let's go ahead and push up to Urdhva D or wheel pose. So most common strategy used today. Now before this, like you got to do a little bit of thinking of where you're going in your, or what was before this, and like what section went here. Basically pulling from your challenges and difficulties information. So like I said, with the challenges and difficulties, they can be placed in any order, but once you have defined that order, then from here, then we go backwards. And what I had there as the priority was making it easier for people to take their arms overhead. So before this, I would want to do a little bit of work that actually helped accomplish that goal of allowing more ease in students' bodies whenever they take their arms overhead. So how do I do that? The options are endless, but knowing that was my goal for this next section before bridge pose and Urdhva Dhanurasana, knowing that I had that goal of that, then it makes it easier to make those decisions of how I'm going to do it. So personally, what I would do here for most of the classes that I teach and for the students that I teach too, I'm going to have some version of like a handstand something or other before these two things. So just for the sake of this exercise, I'm just going to put in handstand. But it can honestly be anything you want it to be. And depending on your students, handstand might not be the most appropriate thing to do. So you might just choose to do some sort of like reclined arms overhead, thoracic extension type work. You might choose to do seated arms overhead type work where you're taking your arms overhead, stretching. You might choose to do more of a prone style arms overhead type work there. The options are endless, but at least you know that this section, that's what you're focusing on. because you have already done the work up top of challenges and difficulties, this is what you want to focus on in this section. So it makes it easier to build out your sequence that has, quite a bit of purpose to it. Why are you doing what you're doing? So handstand, maybe something else before that makes it easier, but more than likely you've already been doing a bunch of down dog in this sequence if it's a vinyasa class. So I wouldn't really worry about it a ton, but maybe somewhere along the way you already did more of this arms overhead style of work. So for the sake of the sequence, I'm just going to leave it at handstand. Now, if you go up into the next section in our challenges and difficulties, so next section up, what do we have there? So arms overhead, back body mobility work. So I'm going to do that via some twists. So do a few twists and that'll get bring more mobility to the back muscles as well as back of hip a little bit and spine. So it's going to create a little bit more fluid movement through that area of the body. So some twists. So before the handstand, let's say we did a seated twist, Ardha Matsyendrasana, the half lord of the fishes pose. So before the handstand, Ardha Matsyendra asana. And before that, we did revolved triangle pose. So the Parivrita version of triangle, Parivrita Trikonasana. Okay, that's great. So, and the reason I put them in this order is seated pose, but depth of twist. So this is a little bit easier energetically in terms of energetic output or demand, but it's also a slightly deeper rounded back twist than this one is here, the Parivrita Trikonasana. So I went from slightly deeper twist to less deep twist there. So going backwards. So that'll take care, for the sake of this exercise, that'll take care of some of the mobility in the back body. Now before that we had open front of hips, open front of thighs. So going backwards in the sequence. Let's go with a thigh stretch. Let's say a low lunge with a thigh stretch. Low lunge with quad stretch. That can be anything you want. And then before that, let's go more targeted to just the front of the hips. So low lunge. Well, hip flexors, there's quite a few of them. So I would go ahead and I would probably target almost all of them, depending if you had the time. So low lunge with, let's say, slight side bend, which could potentially get at psoas group, and then just straightforward low lunge with arms overhead. Arms overhead. Okay. And that's essentially your sequence in a nutshell. All right. Obviously, you're going to build this out to fit and suit whatever level of class you have, whatever amount of time you have, and so on. But this is essentially the gist of building backwards with your destination in mind, as well as your challenges and difficulties in mind. Looking at this could totally be part of your opening poses, depending on the style of your class. But if you need to, scale this back even more, then scale it back even more, make this even easier, how you get into, let's say, the quads, how you get into the hip flexor region, from different positions that are easier, and so on and so on. Or if you need to start to develop even some of this work here, how do you make the back muscles more supple in your warm-ups if you need even easier warm-ups? How do you apply or how do you integrate some of that work all the way up here in an easier or even less demanding warm-up section? Or how do you apply this one here, the arms overhead? How do you get that into your warm-up section in an even easier way? So what I'm trying to get at is, your goal is here, your challenges and difficulties, you have those laid out. And then you just keep repeating them. Like if that's what you're choosing to do, just focus on these 3 things. You keep repeating them again and again until you reach your destination, or get closer and closer to your destination. So this strategy can be used in essentially every format, variety of formats that you're going to teach in. And it can be very informative and very helpful. All right. So I think that's it. I'm hoping that was clear enough. Ask me some questions in the comments section down below if it wasn't. If you need more clarity, please, let's start a conversation. Either way, thanks for watching the video. And if you liked it, hit the like button. If you want more videos like this in the future, hit the subscribe button, turn on the bell, and yeah, you'll be informed every time I put a new video out. Thank you for watching. Bye-bye.